Hi there.
Hi, Thomas. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing fine, thanks.
Wow, is that your study, your where you work?
My office, yes.
Okay. Thanks for this opportunity. Okay.
Hey, looking forward to it. Got to say.
I gave your regards to my mother last night, and she says she remembers you very, very much, and that you're welcome here to her house for as long as you want, anytime you want.
That's great. That's good to hear. Give her my best regards and simply a big hug because I also remember her very fondly.
Yes. So next time in America, please come, and you're more than welcome. Okay. Hello, Claudia. How are you?
Hello, good
Hello.
afternoon, good night.
Hi.
Okay, we're going to give a little time for the others to get into the
Yep.
forum. No, it's Sunday, so it's a little difficult to get everyone, especially at this time. No, but we can't later because we know and we understand that in Switzerland is 6 more hours. No, it's 9 p.m. Right there,
It's 9 o'clock in the evening. That's right.
9 o'clock. Okay, so here is also Alejandra. Hello, Alejandra.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi there.
Hi, Thomas. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi,
Okay, let's give it who's coming. Um, okay, remember, students, today is a little different than in the previous forums. Okay, we are going to make a little introduction of ourselves so that Thomas gets to know you, or a little bit gets to know you. Okay, so why don't we start with that? Okay, why don't we start with you, Claudia? Please introduce yourself
okay.
to Thomas.
Hello, Thomas. My name is
Hi,
Claudia
Claudia.
Sofia. I am an auditor and an accounting, and I working for a long time for KPMG. Uh, and it's an exciting work. All the time have different problems, different topics, but it's nice. You learn a lot of things, and you learn all the time.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
And
Yeah, okay,
what what what
Alejandra, your
what?
turn. What?
Excuse me. What business specifically are you working in?
In audit and manufacturing and services sector.
Okay.
Mhm. Okay, thank you, Claudia. Please, Alejandra, your
Okay.
turn.
Hi, Thomas. My name is Alejandra Catacoli. I am environmental engineer. Currently, I'm working for the government in a program that want to improve the water and sanitation and also electrification in the Pacifico of Colombia. There is a lot of poor people and they have a lot of problems with violence and all narcotraffic and all these things. So we try to improve their life, their quality of life through this project. And also I have a little kid of 6 years old and he maybe
Just
will
saw it.
be running here. So sorry for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alejandra. Juliana, please, your turn.
Hi, Thomas. How are you? My name is Juliana. I'm Ernesto's oldest daughter.
Mhm.
I'm 23 years old, and I'm about to graduate next November. Yes. I'm studying modern languages at Universidad del Bosque here in Colombia, and I'm very happy to be here with you today in order to learn a lot. I really like literature. I really enjoy reading, and I don't know if you had the opportunity to listen to my thesis presentation. So nice to meet you, and hope we can have a good time here.
Okay,
Oh, hi
thank
there.
you, Juliana. Okay, Noelia, please, your turn. Introduce.
Hi everyone, I am Noelia Rodriguez. I am an accountant. I have been worked in KPMG for a lot of years. I like to exercising and dancing. Eh, I have one daughter. Her name is Salome. He's 22 years old. I have two cats. No more. Mhm.
Okay,
And in
thank
which area specifically are you working?
I work in, I am an auditor, financial auditor.
All right. So we got two auditors.
Yes.
you. Okay, Thomas. So this is the ones that arrived. Maybe later some will come. So why don't we start? Because we don't have a lot of time. So it's your turn. It's your forum.
Well, well, thanks you, and welcome to everyone. I'm glad to have you all here and to see you all here. Um, I have to admit, I watched the last podcast that you did with Tony, and since I have to do I'm lecturing a lot because, as you might have learned, I'm professor for literary theory and American studies at the University of Bern here in Switzerland. And I actually much prefer the context of a seminar than a lecture, meaning that I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about myself, and then we would simply decide kind of what it is that you would like to talk about, because I'm not quite sure whether if I can start to talk about literary theory, whether that would be of a real and genuine interest for everyone. So I just, give you a few facts about myself, and then I think you might simply want to suggest what we could or should talk about. So first of all, the way I know Ernesto goes a long way back, exactly 35 years, if I'm not too bad with my math, where we met at the UMass in Massachusetts Amherst, and and yeah, he kind of convinced me to spend actually the winter break, which everyone else usually spends in Florida or somewhere else in the south of the U.S., to go with him to Colombia, and I decided actually to do that, very much to the chagrin, if not fear, of my parents, because, as you might or might not know, these times were rather could be rather perilous in Colombia back then. So my mother sent me a staple of newspapers, clip outs, that showed, Colombia is an uproar and there are terrorists everywhere. Why don't you come home for Christmas to Germany? But I decided to actually to come with Ernesto. And I have to say that, I mean, to be in the US for the first time at this age of 25, I was back then, was already pretty exciting, I have to say. But to spend these 6 weeks, 3 of which in Bogota and 3 in Cali, if I'm not mistaken, was kind of, added the top of the cake, so to speak, for me. Because I mean, if the US was a culture shock, you might imagine that Colombia and Bogota and Cali were also one. Specifically with someone, right? I mean, I had traveled before, but not to these really kind of new places. So these 6 weeks were incredible. I really have to say that from the beginning to end, and I've got so many impressions. I mentioned that to Ernesto yesterday, that I think I could write a book just about these 6 weeks. I certainly could write a book about the entire year that I spent in the US and in Colombia. So that about, how far we go back. And I could, of course, tell a few juicy stories about the two of us being young and not knowing any better. Just to kind of give you one opening of something that we could talk about, basically. The other thing is, as you might have also learned, is that I am a professor of literary theory and American studies at the University of Bern. So I'm also a specialist in the US. So if you would like to be interested to talk more about maybe the US elections, because you I don't know how many hours you spent in front of the TV the last week. I certainly spent too much in front of it. So if you'd be interested in talking about that or giving you some backgrounds of the rather strange electoral system in the US, I'll be very happy to do that. Otherwise, I'm a father of 2 sons, 24, 22, and a daughter of 7 from my second marriage. I am a devoted musician. I'm a cook. I'm a gardener. That's about roughly what what might be interesting about myself in this regard. So I would actually, you kind of suggest, rather than me just starting about something that might, talking about something that might be of no interest, is if you have any kind of preferences of things that you would like to know more about or me to talk about, just let me know.
All right. So what do you want him to talk about? Okay, Alejandra, ask him, please.
Well, I really want to hear about literature because I like it and I have many questions about that. Maybe it's the first and the only opportunity that I have to talk about in literature with a professor because I am I am an engineer, so it's not easy to have this opportunity, but I don't know, maybe I want to make some questions about that, but it's my opinion. I don't know.
Okay. I mean, any other? I mean, just let's collect a few of the interests and maybe I can address them one after the other.
No, for me it's okay too because it's different for our profession. Noelia and me, we are an accounting, and it's nice to hear other person to speak about other topics.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other requests?
For example, for me, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, for example, for me, I really love literature, and it's kind of my sense because I study literature at the university because of the languages. I study British literature, North American literature, Spanish literature. So it would be very nice to talk about this topic with you.
Okay.
I have another question for you, Thomas. You never come back to Bogota or Colombia again? Only one time?
I was in Colombia actually only this time around. Yeah, I visited Honduras actually on my honeymoon, which was very nice. And then I came back for 2 conferences, both of which were in Brazil. So that's South America. What I know about South America. No, but alas, I never come back. Although I definitely have to tell you that I never actually really wanted to leave because since Ernesto had a girlfriend back then, he felt obliged for me to find one for me in these 6 weeks, and he tried desperately, and in the second half, he presented me to a colleague of his, Adriana Mendoza, and I fell desperately in love with that woman and planned to have a career even as a trash worker in Bogota just to stay in Colombia.
Okay.
But alas, no, I never really made it back. I'd love to. I'd really love to because I just renewed. There was almost like a triangle because I had a roommate, Ricardo Fernandez, from Peru, and we 3 kind of hung out together quite a lot. And I actually happened to see him again after 34 years then last year in Massachusetts, where I had the opportunity to teach a summer school at Harvard University, which in a certain way made me really very proud because when I came back from just that stay at UMass where we visited Harvard, on a trip for a weekend. I kind of, when I came back to Constance, where I was studying at Lake Constance in Germany, I hung a postcard on my IKEA shelf that I had back then, kind of giving myself the promise that one of these days I would return to Harvard to teach there. And that actually came true last year. So no, this year actually. So that was kind of a dream come true for me to actually teach there, even if only for a summer school. But Harvard is something very special, needless to say. All right, so a bit about my background. I mean, I am an Americanist, as I said, by trade, so to speak, but I was always very much interested in philosophy as well. And literary theory is basically something that is a mixture, let's say, between literature and philosophy. And I'm an avid reader of both, although I have to say that looking at my bookshelves here,
Wow,
A lot
it's
of
so
wow.
great, wonderful library.
Yes.
looking at my bookshelves, I think I have more of an interest almost in theory and philosophy than I do in literature, which actually was also why I had a rather hard time getting a job after all, because my interest was too theoretical, and that shied away a lot of committee members at the universities that I was at. And that's why I'm really very, very lucky, because I got what, as far as I still know, is the only professorship in literary theory in all the German-speaking countries. That means Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. So I can basically do unapologetically what I would have to apologize for in almost all other contexts, right? Doing too much theory. So literary theory, as I said, it's basically, it's very much informed by a lot of philosophy. And I mean, why I teach literary theory is simply the following: is that everyone who reads a book does do so with certain assumptions as to what it means to read literature, how you should read literature, whether you simply read the book to find out whether you like it or not, right? Put it away after 15 pages if you don't like it. But if you study literature, and that goes to Juliana probably as well, is at a certain point, you have to realize that this kind of, this first phase of how to encounter literature, simply saying, I liked it or I don't like it, right? This kind of impressionistic level, I would call it, right? Is not enough anymore, because what you're basically doing, you're studying literature as a science, which in itself is not without problems, because literature by default is not science, right? As the engineers certainly would know. It's a completely different discourse, basically, right? It's another way to access and present the world. And most of it, needless to say, is also fiction, right? So it's not as obliged, let's put it like that, to the truth as a scientific report or the manual for a dishwasher would probably be, right? So, but if you're analyzing literature from a scientific point of view, as I said, you know, everyone comes with certain expectations to literature. But if you want to talk scientifically about it, you would have to have a certain kind of theoretical background as to what you can actually scientifically claim literature to be, which per se, as I mentioned, is not literature, right? So that's always a problem. But there are actually quite a few different approaches, right, that you can have, in which you frame, so to speak, literature in order to talk in a scientific way about it, right? And these would be literary theories, and there are actually quite a few of them around. Just to mention Marxist, psychoanalytic, structuralist, post-structuralist, phenomenologic, rather recently environmentalist. It's another kind of badge that has been added to it. So the most important thing is that, I mean, everyone, as you know, can read a book entirely differently, or read a poem, or experience a drama completely differently, which is the nature of literature, right? Because if it would be all clear and would be unequivocally interpreted, then it would probably, again, be more of a scientific text, because everyone understands what that means and maybe can agree on it. But literature by default is something that you need not, and possibly even cannot, agree upon. Which could then basically say, because you can discuss about taste or whatever endlessly, that you would have to convince someone else that the way you read a book or a poem or a short story or a drama could convince others to read it in the same way. I mean, that's basically what science also does, right? Is to explain to others and to share a certain view of the world and say, okay, this is how I see it. But as I said, since literature is not science, the thing is that the interpretation of literature is something very, very subjective, right? Remains subjective. And that's always something that I try to enforce upon my students, is that because they are very reluctant to kind of utter their own take, right? Because it could possibly be too subjective, too personal, right? And that's exactly, what literary theory is all about, right? So, because if you're able to explain how you read a certain passage, or how you read a metaphor, or how you read a relation between protagonists, I mean, there, as I said, many different approaches to that, so that you can convince others that you read this book or this work of art in general in a certain way, because you can actually make a point for it. You can actually show this is what is actually happening in this passage, right? It's not just this personal impression that you like or don't like it, but you can actually try to point out, okay, I read this passage in this way, or I read the entire book in this way, because there is this and this and this and this, and you try to put the pieces together, and you can obviously put the pieces together in convincing ways, or you can put them together in unconvincing ways, right? That not everyone would share, would just shake their heads. That's nonsense, right? So fact is, the interpretation of literature will always remain a very subjective business. And I actually always encourage my students to start from their very personal experiences, right? Because that's what triggers the interest in literature in the first place, right? But then to kind of keep on thinking more about what is actually going on, right? So what you do is basically, if you analyze a text, and the word, it's a Greek word, means simply to take apart, right? To take it apart and to see exactly what's happening. Again, on many different levels, can be narrative, can be single protagonists, can be central metaphors. I mean, there, as I said, many different ways to do that. But no matter where you start from, or what premises you start upon, you should be able to explain them to others and to try to convince them that this reading of yours makes actually sense for more persons than yourself. That's basically what doing literature as a science means. And of course, I mean, there's a lot of questions, starting with very basic questions. For example, what actually counts as literature? What do we consider to be literature? Is literature just that which has a novel on the front page, right? Is art that what we encounter when we go into a museum? because it says museum. Oh, we're in the presence of art. So, right. I mean, so all these things that are actually going on as to what you consider literature to be. Is literature something that should be beautiful? Is literature something that should be educating? Is literature something that you should enjoy? Is literature something that should actually enable you to raise new questions, right? Should literature be critical? Should literature be original? Right. So all these different facets, that's kind of the first step, so to speak, that you address in literary theory. And then, as I said, you kind of familiarize people with aesthetic theories, going back to Aristotle via Kant to rather new ones. My lecture covers specifically the new developments in the 20th and 21st century. And then because as I said, you can take very different angles on it, right? You could subject a poem to a Marxist reading, right? You can subject a poem to just to address the structures. What is this poem all about? You can read it as an expression of the psyche of the author, which tends always to go a bit wild. I'm very mistrustful of these approaches, to be honest. I call them white Freudianism. But I mean, there are other kind of more scientific, psychoanalytically informed theories about literature. Is it literary sociological? Do we say that does that work reflect a certain form of sentiment or structure of feeling of a certain portion of the populace at a certain time? Is it hermeneutic? Are you actually trying to find out how the audience of a Shakespearean play in the 15th century might have received what was going on the stage in comparison to today, where we might think of it in a completely different vein? So that's basically the questions that literary theory addresses. Kind of give the students a kind of a toolbox of many different approaches, and they would have then to figure out what they consider to be the best approach to, again, generalize from your very subjective impressions as to more or less convincing interpretations about the. And that's also something because and here's actually where the difference to the kind of usual sciences may actually be, is that because taking things apart is nice and well. The problem is that, I mean, if you bring your car to a repair, they would probably have to take it apart to find out what's wrong with it, right? But I assume that you would assume, or at least would expect, that they put the car back together again, right? And this is exactly what an interpretation is, right? It's not simply to take the stuff apart and point out, I found this metaphor, and I found this protagonist structure, and I found this very impressive phrase, or what have you, right? It's just you have to put it together again, saying, this is how I read this text. So you again basically back on the subjective level, right? You have to take a stance, because you cannot simply, as I said, take it apart and look what I've discovered, right? Because what I always tell my students, well, now that you got it, what are you going to do with it, right? So you could find out about all these things that are in there and that might be quite interesting, but at the end of the day, you have to put it together again and say, this is what I take this text to mean, or this is how I take this text to work, right? So this aspect, and students are almost very reluctant, can come up with lists of what they all not found in this text. And I said, yeah, but and then, I mean, what does that actually mean for the text, right? What does that imply? What is your interpretation of this text that you have drawn out from all this puzzle? But please put that together again for me. Yeah, and that's actually very often the more difficult part, because then again, you know, students become kind of a bit fidgety. Yeah, but isn't that my personal? I say, yeah, of course it is. Yes. But rather than not take a stance and simply point out all these different things, is you know, I want to know how you interpret this text with the toolbox that I gave you. So that is roughly what I do in literary theory. And again, I mean, that is very much informed by philosophy from, as I said, Aristotle, Augustine, Kant, Hegel, Heidegger, you name them. And specifically in the 20th century, structuralists and post-structuralists, I'm a very large fan of the French post-structuralist philosophers, who kind of enabled me to read texts completely against the grain and in a completely new fashion. But yeah, I mean, there are fashions, so to speak, in literary theory too. And right now, everyone has become a little wary of French theory because it's so difficult to read. But for me, it was kind of a real mind opener, I have to say. And I've been writing not only about literature, as I mentioned. I've written on, just in the recent few years, I've written on environmentalism, on how we could conceive of a new relationship between us and the environment, or between the subject and the object. That's a very philosophical way to put it. I wrote about populism. I've been reading about, what else is there, about a new concept of community. That's actually the book that I'm working on right now, which might get very difficult to explain if you challenge me to. Although I think it might be quite interesting to think a bit about it. But that's actually something, that's the one book that I feel that I have to write, that I have to get out of my system, because I'm carrying it around for 6 or 7 years now. Thing is, I've always been doing other things and writing other essays and editing other books. So I never really got the opportunity to kind of really sit down and write that book. But if that's the last one I have to do, I'll try to start writing it rather soonish. So that's one part. The other part in teaching is mainly devoted to American studies. And American studies, in contrast to American literature, is something that has been growing out of the US-American context. And that means that you look at literature not only, to literary products or cultural artifacts, not only in the context of literary theory or literature proper or aesthetics, but actually in the context of the political, the historical, the social. So it's a rather interdisciplinary approach to American culture as such. And it basically covers, I'm just giving a lecture on, it's called American Genesis, that goes from the beginnings of Native Americans. I've been working a lot on Native Americans and on mythopoetic worldview, in contrast to the rational worldview of the Western settlers, via Puritanism, which is still pretty strong. The Puritans that arrived, the founding fathers, so to speak, that arrived on the shores of Massachusetts with their Calvinistic Protestant, and Puritanism is a specific form of Protestantism that they carried with them, and that has influenced American thought immensely, to the Revolution, to actually American Romanticism, Emerson, Thoreau, Hawthorne, Melville, Edgar Allan Poe, to the Civil War. That's kind of one oversight. lecture, and the other then goes from the Civil War basically to the end of the 20th century, covering modernism, naturalism, postmodernism, needless to say, and the new forms of neorealism, as they have been termed. And I've been writing on almost all facets of American culture. Not so much about the early stuff, so I'm more into the 19th and 20th century basically when I write something like that. And in addition, I'm actually the only one right now, alas, responsible for an MA in world literature, which obviously is preposterous because a single person cannot possibly teach world literature. And we don't have actually the personnel to teach all necessary facets of world literature, which would include, as the term suggests, the entire world, right? And I'm not familiar with Chinese literature. I've read quite a bit of African literature, of European literature, needless to say, North American literature, a bit of South American literature. Yeah, that would be the first kind of mass of information that I'm throwing out at you. I just saw that we're already almost reaching the end of the first part. All right, so then I'm definitely going to shut up now and wait for more questions on your part.
Okay.
If there are
Thank
any.
you.
Let's go to
Okay.
the next session and we will ask.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's meet in the other session, please.
Okay.
Okay. Can we have like something like a 3-minute break, because I'd really love to have a fag? Is that okay?
Okay. 3 minutes
Okay.
left. Break. Okay.
I'll join you after 1. Okay.
Okay.
Hey, stay
3
tuned.
minutes.
Stay with us, as they say.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Bye.
Break.
Bye.